Chapter 7, The Great Scheme. Oh, and as I'm reading, in your notebook, I want you to write down any questions that you think of as I read, because right now you're going to hear their plan, and you might have some questions, maybe even for Soren and Gylfi as you hear what their plan is, okay? All right, pretend to march, Soren. That is what we must do. It was just after the first rising shriek had been sounded by the brutish great horned owl, who perched on one of the outcroppings. Soren and Gylfi had met at the stone ledge for morning food rations. What do you mean, pretend to march? Soren blinked. Between the horrible truth about his brother and missing his parents, Soren could hardly hear what Gylfi was saying. His head was filled with the thoughts of his parents. It seemed as if every hour he found a new, more painful way to miss them. One, he decided, did not get used to missing parents. The thought of never seeing his mom or Da again was the most unbearable thing he knew. And yet he could not stop thinking of them. He did not want to stop thinking of them. He would never stop thinking of them. Listen to me, Soren. It came to me first that the reason for the march is because of the shadows cast from the high cliffs into the Glacidium. And the arch is always in the shadows, right? Right, Soren nodded. We are forced to march so that no one group of owls will spend too much time under these shadowy shields against the moon's light. So they're making them march so that if they spend too much time in the shadows, they wouldn't get moon blinked, right? So that's why they're marching them, so that they stay in the light longer. I remembered what you said, how we must pretend to say our names, but instead we actually repeat our numbers. And then it was easy. We have to pretend to march but never move, so we stay under the protection of the shadows. I suddenly remembered how my father, who was a great navigator, one of the best in the entire desert of Kunir, had tried to explain to me that stars, and even the moon, do not move in the way they seem to from our view on Earth. Some stars, my father said, even appear to stand still in the sky, but, in fact, they do move. Huh? Soren grunted. Look, I know it's a little weird, but my Da explained that this was because of the great distance that disguises in stillness a star's motion. Even the moon, my father said, which is closer than many stars, is so distant that we cannot see the wobbles in its path as it glides through the night. So don't you see that if the motion of something as big as the moon could be disguised well, couldn't the motion of something as small as us be disguised? Have you ever looked up at the moon and the stars? It doesn't really look like they're moving, does it? It looks like they're still. So they're thinking, okay, if the moon and stars are kind of disguised or you can't tell that they're moving, maybe we should think about that for our plan. A new light began to glimmer in Soren's eyes. Gylfi grew more excited. We can be like the stars, only in reverse. In other words, what would happen if we just stayed still and pretended to march? If we marched in place? What about the monitors? Soren asked. I've thought about that. The monitors always stand at the edges of the mass of marching owls. They don't really see what is going on in the middle. I saw a grass owl stumble last night. No one said, oh, sorry, or move it, or you clumsy bird. All the owls simply parted and went around the grass owl. So what if we pretend to march and stay under the shadow of the arch each time? Get it? We would march in place and give the appearance of motion. It's a great scheme, Gylfi. Soren's voice was filled with awe. We'll try it tonight. I can't wait, Gylfi said, but I'm hungry now. So maybe you had thought of some questions that you would ask them. The plan is they're gonna march in place and they want the other owls to just kind of march around them. Think it would work? Give me a thumbs up if you like their plan. All right. I see some thumbs to the side. You're not so confident in their plan? Yeah, let's see. This is it. Soren blinked as a large rusty-colored owl shoved one dead cricket toward him on the stone ledge. I mean, this is it, Soren quickly said, correcting what had been a question as he stared down at what St. Aggie's called breakfast. No mouse meat, no fat worms. Oh, for a hummingbird. But one cricket? This was ridiculous. He would starve. As the owlets stopped to eat, there was only one sound of their beaks crunching the crickets. Soren couldn't believe that no one talked. Owlets always talked when they ate. His little sister Eglantine jabbered so much sometimes that his mom had to remind her to eat. Eat the feet on that bug, Eglantine. Eat the feet. You talk so much, you're missing the very best part of the beetle. So the silence began to bother him, and there was indeed a terrible quiet to the stone canyons that made up St. Aggie's. Always, of course, there was the hollow whistle of the wind and the endless clicking of talons on the hard rock surfaces. Other than that, there was not much sound. Instead, there was an overwhelming sense of being cut off, separated from earth, and even from sky. Soren began to realize that the entire lives of these owls, if one could call it living, were carried out in the deep stone boxes and slots, the canyons and ravines of St. Aggie's. There was very little water, just a trickle here and there into which they could dip their beaks for a drink. There were no leaves, no mosses that he could see, no grasses, none of the soft things that wrapped the world and made it tender and springy. It was a stone forest with its jagged outcroppings, rock needles, and spires and ledges. They had almost finished eating, so there was not even the clicking, just the sound of crickets being crunched. An owl next to him muttered, "I'd love a little piece of rat snake." "Ooh," Soren sighed and thought of Mrs. Plithifer. His family avoided serving snake out of respect for Mrs. Plithifer. Why? So isn't that kind of funny that the family didn't feed the owls snakes because their housemaid, Mrs. Plithifer, is a snake, right? So out of respect for Mrs. Plithifer, they didn't feed the family's snake. Mrs. Plithifer said it was nonsense. "Show me a rat snake or a bull snake that anyone really loved," she would say. "Don't worry about my feelings. I have no feelings toward such snakes." But still, his parents avoided such foods. Soren's father called it species sensitivity. Soren had no idea what that meant, except he didn't want to hurt Mrs. Plithifer's feelings, and she had just said she had none. Soren, of course, didn't really believe this. He thought Mrs. Plithifer had plenty of feelings. She was a most lovable creature, and his heart beat a little harder when he remembered her calling down to him from the hollow high in the fir tree. It almost made him cry to remember her voice. What had happened to her that night? Had Clud done something to her as well? Or had she gotten away to get help? Did she miss him? Did his parents miss him? Once more, there was that sharp pain of missing, and Soren nearly staggered with the very idea of never seeing his parents. Then he thought of Clud and began to tremble all over again. "You all right?" Gylfi asked. She was so small that she barely reached up to Soren's wingtips. "No, I'm not all right," Soren gasped. "Nothing is right. Don't you miss your parents? Don't you wonder what they think happened to you?" Yes, I just can't think about it," Gylfi replied. "Listen, pull yourself together. We have our great scheme, remember?" "What do you mean, pull yourself together? Do you know what I just figured out about my brother?" "Look, we don't have much time," Gylfi said quickly. "Make sure you get assigned to the Pelatorium." "The Pelatorium?" Soren said blankly. Chapter 8, the Pelatorium. Auntie Finny suddenly appeared. "Cricket Hunter, you're perfect. You see, here in our lovely stone country, the cricket season is much longer. They hide in the nooks and crannies and then come out in the sunshine to bask in the heat of the day." Soren started to speak. "I'm feeling a little peckish. You know, Auntie, I think maybe the Pelatorium would be better for me." "Oh, the Pelatorium?" Auntie Finny looked slightly confused. She had never had an owlet suggest another workstation or training schedule. She looked at the barn owl. He didn't look well, and if he failed as a cricket hunter, it would reflect poorly on her. And then again, if she fulfilled this owl's request, it would perhaps put him in her debt. It was always good to have an owlet indebted to you. That means, like, if she does this favor for him, that's good because then he might do they could return the favor later. Yes, I suppose so." She gazed at the young owl. Soren felt the soft yellow glow of her eyes. "Now remember, dear, what I've done for you, and remember the little," she beaked the word, "nap I allowed you." The yellow light turned a bit hard like glinting gold. "Then follow that line over there into the Pelatorium." Okay, is the first part of their plan working? Give me a thumbs up if the first part's working. All right, they're both headed to the Pelatorium. "I am 47-2. I am to be your guide for the Pelatorium. Follow me." The owlet spoke in a peculiar manner. Her sounds were clipped and hollow. It was not like the terrible thrum and clang of Jat and Jut, but it was like no owl sound Soren had ever heard. Soren and Gylfi followed number 47-2, who had begun to march. Soon they heard the click of all the owlet's talons as they struck the ground, for they were once more marching in time. Now the strange hollow tone in which 47-2 had spoken seemed to hover over the vast marching assembly of owlets. They were singing. So they're all singing this song. Every pellet has a story all its own. Every pellet has a story all its own. With its fur and teeth and bones and 1 or 2 stones, every pellet has a story all its own. So they're talking about the owl pellets, right? They're singing about the owl pellets. That every owl pellet has its own story, right? We shall dissect every pellet with glee. Perhaps we'll find a rodent's knee. And never shall we tire in the sacred task that we conspire, nor do our work less than perfectly. And those bright flecks at the core, which make our hearts soar, shall forever remain the deepest mystery. Nothing could have prepared Soren and Gylfi for the shock of what met their eyes as they entered the Pelletorium. They had been led into another box canyon, and on slabs of rock ledges, hundreds of owls bobbed their heads up and down over thousands of pellets that had been yarped by owls. Do you think you can figure out why it's called the Pelletorium? Pelletorium. So there's thousands of owl pellets in this room. If either one of these 2 little owlets had known the meaning of the word for a place that you would not want to go, they would have known that this was certainly the deepest and worst place you could imagine. But neither Soren nor Gylfi in their short lives knew of such a terrible place. Until their snatching, they really had only known what might be called heaven. Life high in a lovely tree hollow or cactus, lined with the downy fluff of their parents, plump insects delivered several times a day, and then the first juicy mouse morsels. And besides all the delicious meals, there were stories of flight, of learning to fly, of the feeling that must be deep in their gizzards in order to rise on the wind. Number 47-2 stepped up to them and, in her weirdly hollow voice, she began to speak. I am what is called a 3rd-degree picker. Okay, sorry, I had to turn off the microphone there. Okay, I am what is called a 3rd-degree picker. I lost my place, hold on. Make sure you keep your microphone off, okay? Oh, there I am. Okay, I am what is called a 3rd-degree picker. I pick through the pellets for the larger objects, pebbles, bone, and teeth mostly. 2nd-degree pickers pick for feathers and fur. 1st-degree pickers pick for flecks. This is a fleck. 47-2 pointed with her talon to the tiniest speck that glinted in an open pellet. It is a kind of metal, she paused. Or something, she added vaguely. You need not know what they are. You need only know that flecks are precious, more precious than gold. To become a fleck picker is the highest level of skill in the Pelletorium. Tomorrow, I shall be advanced 1 level. I shall be a 2nd-degree picker. Therefore, as the most advanced 3rd-degree picker, it is my task to instruct you. And then the owlet blinked. She began humming the dreadful song. It is best when beginning as a picker to use your beak. Your talons can be used to steady the pellet. Each object you find is to be lined up neatly on the stone ledge, your work area. Failure to line up objects neatly is a most serious offense. Offenders are severely punished, as shall be demonstrated during our laughter therapy sessions. Soren and Gylfi had no idea what this owlet was talking about. Laughter therapy? Do your work diligently, and you too may be advanced someday. The owlet then stepped up to the ledge, which was covered with pellets, and bent over one. Proceed. It is strictly forbidden to use your own pellets in this work. 47-2 glared at Soren. The owlet bent her speckled head and began to pick. Soren felt a gagging sensation and yarped another pellet. Do you think he likes the work so far? Give me a thumbs up if you think he likes it, or thumbs down if he is not loving it. No. In fact, he doesn't like it at all. He yarped his own pellet, right? Soren and Gylfi had no idea how long they had been working. It seemed endless. It was not entirely quiet, however. At certain intervals, a low, soft whistle alarm would be sounded from one of the smaller owls who monitored the work from overhead ledges, and the sound of another pellet song would begin to rise. The songs were sung in the same hollow tones in which 47-2 had spoken, but Soren felt that they were sung mostly to provide a rhythm for their work. The words, he supposed, like their own non-numbered names, had become meaningless. In between the songs, it was not completely silent. There were, of course, certain commands that had to be given. New pellets needed in Area 10B, or Area 20C needs to pick up the pace. And then there was some talk among the owls as they worked, but the more carefully Soren and Gylfi listened, the stranger this talk seemed. And then, suddenly, an owlet working at the same ledge as Soren began to speak. 12-1, I feel perfect this morning. I have just completed my first set of pellets. I am sure you shall feel perfect, too, when you have completed your first set. It is a feeling of rare contentment to complete a set. I feel this sense of rare contentment every morning at this hour. Rare, Soren thought. That was a word he knew, for his parents had told them that the family of barn owls to which they belonged, the Tyto alba, had become rare, which meant there were not many of them. So how could this owlet's contentment be rare if it happened every morning at a particular hour? I too feel perfect, another owlet now spoke, turning toward Gylfi this time. It was nearly the same speech. At regular intervals now, the two owls turned alternately to Soren and Gylfi and gave short little reports on their states of contentment. On occasion, these reports became interspersed with comments. 25-2 for an owlet of your exceedingly tiny stature. You have a fine posture as you peck. Thank you, Gylfi replied, and dipped her head in what she thought was a docile manner. You are most welcome, 25-2. Then the owlet closest to Soren began. 12-1, your beak work is quite advanced. You work with industry and delicacy. Thank you, said Soren, and then for some reason he added, thank you very much. You're welcome, but you need not be excessively polite. It wastes energy. Politeness is its own reward, just like flex. What are flex? What did he just do? He asked a question. The question slipped out, but many of the pellet songs referred to flex, and Soren could not understand for the life of him what they were. He understood the feathers and bones and teeth being found in the pellets, but what were these mysterious flecks? The two owlets each gave small piercing shrieks that contrasted sharply with their usual tones. Question alarm! Question alarm! Two ferocious, darkly feathered owls, their glaring yellow eyes framed above by dark red eye tufts, swooped down and plucked up Soren. How could you, Soren? Gylfi nearly cried out, but luckily the question died on her beak. I think their plan is starting to fall apart. What do you think? Soren felt as if his gizzard were dropping to his talons as the two owls soared with him, dangling between them. They were transporting him in a most painful manner. Each one held a wing in his talons, and it was as if he were being torn in half. And as they spiraled upward in the pelletorium, Soren felt beneath him not the cushion of captured air of which his father had spoken, but instead a surge of noisy vibrations that seemed to pummel him from below. They are laughing at you, 12-1. They laugh so hard the air is tossed with their chuckles, said one of the owls. You, 12-1, the other owl was speaking now. You are our first object of the day for laughter therapy. Soren remained mute. No matter how many questions might batter his brain, his imagination, or dance on the tip of his beak, he would never ask them. The two owls had now alighted with him on a very high ledge that was visible to the entire pelletorium below. The laughter of the owlets and the scores of monitors and guards ricocheted off the stone walls. It filled Soren's head with a terrible clatter. He thought he would go yoicks right there and start screaming. And now for the best moment of all in laughter therapy. There was a thrill screech. The air stirred, and Skench, an Obla general, landed next to Soren. And then Skench's second-in-command, Lieutenant Sporn, arrived, eyes darting in an amber glee. Oh, great Glocks, thought Soren. What now? Dante?